And insisting on those divisions is why we can't find the good and the good side and the bad side, because we're all in the mix together. And I think if we could chill a little on the fact that everybody's different, nobody's the same, everybody's different, everybody's unique. Can we stop beating up on people for being different? And I think the mindset of cooperation will prove to be stronger than the mindset of competition. We're back.
I'm loving these conversations. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it continues to get more and more interesting, I think, as we go. We had a little conversation right before this, and I was like, oh, we should have recorded that. That was really good.
Yeah, I told you over text. We mentioned this last time, but we have to constantly refrain from going too deep over text. So we're trying to save conversation, and not leave people behind. And like, what are they talking about? I'm lost. But I wanted to clarify a couple things, back off of some extreme statements that I've made over the last two.
Okay.
So one is masks, one is the vaccine. I do believe there is some efficacy with masks. I just don't. I think it is very context specific. I think anytime somebody tries to put a number to it, masks are 50% effective, they are oversimplifying it, because it is literally impossible to quantify the efficacy of masks without knowing the details of the situation that you're trying to quantify it for. Like N95 masks are 95% effective in removing particles.
Right, effective against what? Like holding egg
yeah.
yolks?
Yeah, but that 95% efficacy is specifically in a lab setting, just testing particles, not talking about COVID or anything like that. So obviously beards, how you're wearing it, what type of mask you're wearing, all this is going to affect it.
How big your head is.
So I do believe that the efficacy of masks is grossly overstated. But I do want to back off saying masks have no effect, because I actually explained to a friend pretty similarly to how you explained it, the physics of it, of just like you definitely reduce spray, because like I can't blow as far. Like if I blow, the air is not going to go.
Yeah.
So there is definitely some physical aspect to it, but I don't believe they're as effective as people claim. And I think people try to quantify it and put a number around it. There's a psychological aspect of us where if we hear a number, we tend to give it more credence. We tend to believe that it's a more factual statement than it might actually be. Other one is vaccines, the COVID vaccine specifically. I said, I don't believe it saved any lives. I do believe it saved some lives, specifically people who are immunocompromised and elderly. With that, like if you have roughly 5-10 years left to live and you take a vaccine that might have some side effects and you survive COVID, obviously if you survive COVID and you wouldn't, that's a benefit to you, even if you have a side effect in 2 years. The problem is there are deaths from the vaccine as well. And that number is very hard to quantify, because the same entity that we trust with all of our information, the CDC, put in place the VAERS system, which is extremely unreliable. It's a passive reporting system. And they'll kind of lean on that aspect and say, well, we can't really use this data, but trust us in every other regard. So I do.
Well, I mean, what's the alternative?
To have more rigorous
people. I mean, all these hospitals and doctors have to like make sure they report.
Yeah.
I don't know, with insurance, there's a lot of forms already.
Yeah.
We probably ask insurance companies and get a lot better answers, for real.
But still, you're looking at something where if somebody dies from COVID right after getting the shot, if you get the shot and they die, it's like they died from the vaccine, right?
They fell down an elevator shaft.
Yeah. But if you take the shot and then you die from a heart attack in a month, can you really determine if that's the vaccine? It's very difficult, and the incentive isn't there.
part of the reason the data is wrong is not necessarily because of a faulty system, but because the facts are fuzzy themselves.
They are, yeah. So I do believe that the vaccine saved lives. I think that number of 20 million is absurd, I think. There is modeling built into all of this, so it is all built on flawed modeling that usually assumes that natural immunity doesn't exist.
All modeling is flawed.
It assumes that the death rate of COVID is going to be the same as it was in the beginning, and we know that viruses tend to weaken over time because of evolution, right? Like the longer you can survive and keep your host alive, the more likely you are to be a successful virus.
If it kills you instantly, well, no one's going to get exposed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was punching some numbers with my buddy Truthy, and I was like, what's a realistic number? If we want to be really skeptical about this, what's a realistic number of lives that were saved from the vaccine? And it gave the number about 1 to 3 million. 1 to 3 million lives saved by the vaccine. And I can accept that.
That's not nothing.
But I also asked, what's a realistic number of lives that have been lost because of the vaccine? So VAERS has about 35 to 40,000 possible deaths from the vaccine in the U.S. And we can look at excess deaths and stuff like that. And I didn't, prepare all of this to have everything so I can back up with like the actual
it's clear you've been looking into this.
Yeah, but it says the estimate would be 500,000 to about 1.5 million deaths from the vaccine. Plausibly. Not that that's a fact, but plausibly. Like it is actually impossible to determine, just like it's actually impossible to determine how many lives were saved from the vaccine, because it's like, if you take the vaccine and live, like, how do I know you would have died, right? It's impossible to know that.
Well, and if you took the vaccine and then died, how do you know that the two are connected?
Yeah, exactly. Especially as the time increases between
correlation
the dose.
and right? There's some link between like the release of Nicolas Cage movies and certain airline crashes.
Yeah.
Like, right. The correlation is not causation, but this is it's a pretty important topic. We're putting medicine in hundreds of millions of people. That's really complex, and skepticism is warranted.
So my bias entered in there. I'm trying to self-analyze here. Why did I allow myself to fall back into narrative and bias rather than like critical thinking there? And I'm very anti-authoritarian, and I'm very anti-authoritarian, and I believe objectively that the response to COVID was one of the most authoritarian things I've ever seen on a large scale. Like the measures taken were...
So you're already worried about government behaving this way, and then suddenly it does, and like your guard's up. Yeah.
Public health officials tend to overstate results or be overly confident about efficacy of different things, and they state it as fact because they're trying to get compliance and stuff like that.
Well, or maybe even are trying to believe it themselves.
Yeah, very much. Like just because somebody's wrong doesn't mean that they don't
that they're lying, right?
Yeah.
Well, there was a really great it was a TED Talk, talking about how good it feels when you're right.
Yeah.
Feels good to be right.
Yeah.
But how does it feel when you're wrong? And she said, it feels just like being right. You can't tell. You think you're right.
Yeah. Oh, so you're saying when you're wrong, but you think you're right.
Yeah.
Like not when you're wrong and find out you're wrong.
Right.
Sure.
Like it's not the moment of revelation, but when you're saying something that you believe to be correct, but it is not, it feels like truth. Doesn't feel any different from speaking something that was correct all along.
Which I think is something we have backwards, actually. Like, as far as, and I'm specifically talking about when you're wrong and find out you're wrong.
So then that feels shitty, but...
This is something I try to embrace myself.
Yeah.
Like, it's the reason why we're starting off this episode with me saying, like, hey, I was a bit more extreme. I need to add this nuance so that I'm not just making this bold statement and not qualifying it and making sure like people understand exactly where I'm coming from with it. Like the vaccines did save lives. Over time, that positive effect, as far as the number of lives saved, it could end up being a draw. That doesn't change the fact that the people whose lives were saved, right? But when you're talking about the meta-analysis later on, if people started having cancers and stuff from it 20 years from now, it's hard to quantify
Yeah.
if that washes out. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think there are some problems, and over time, as we learn more and more from the vaccine, there are things that we're still learning about the vaccine that don't look good. I mean, the I'm not a scientist, so I don't want to like overstate anything as fact, but they said the bio uptake. I'm probably using the wrong word there, but like
I wouldn't know the difference. I'm not.
Where it actually goes is not actually localized completely. Like they're finding the mRNA in other parts of people's bodies, like testicles, liver, all over. Not in everyone. So I don't want to overstate that at all. Then there's they actually can't control the dosage. I just learned this yesterday. The mRNA vaccine, mRNA, it's instructions, right? You're dosing somebody with instructions, but you can't control what those instructions do, like how many copies of the spike protein that they create. I think it's the spike protein that it's creating.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff with the vaccine that really concerns me, but I lean too heavily toward like I made sweeping statements that I shouldn't have made because I want to be intellectually honest here. I don't want to overstate something. I don't want to.
Yeah, I appreciate the intellectual honesty.
Yeah.
That I appreciate that about what we're doing, and it's funny enough. I want to fess up to my own like rethoughts about some of the nuance around the effectiveness of the polio vaccine. It seemed like an open shut case to me, but the data looks pretty conclusive that we are now in a chicken and egg loop, or a catch-22, where we can stop the spread of polio with this with the oral vaccine.
Yeah.
But one of the side effects of the oral vaccine is it causes polio.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we have to use the very thing we're hitting to we're using so this very hammer that we're using puts in nails.
Yeah.
Right? It's like and so anyway, it's interesting to see that we are actually caught in a goofy problem because of the oral polio vaccine, and we're phasing that out. But then it begs the question of like, why do people in certain countries not get the wild variety of polio?
Yeah, and this is something that, like I said, I mean, when we first talked about this on the first conversation, the only thing that I knew was that cases were declining before the vaccine. But that doesn't mean anything because things go up and down. So you could just be on a downswing of an overall trend that could still be going up. So that alone doesn't say anything. It was only when I started looking in deeper into it. Obviously, I mentioned the pesticide correlation, which is it's a strong correlation. It's not a weak correlation at all. But they've never done any double-blind studies to test this. So it's basically unknowable at this point because we're looking at the 50s, Yeah. And then yeah, like I shared that chat with you yesterday where I was like, I just started asking these questions, and one of the things I do like about questioning ChatGPT is it is going to typically back the consensus narratives.
Yeah,
but it tends to actually be much more honest with where unknowns exist than I sometimes expect. Because, we hear about all this potential bias in AI, which is a very big problem. But then
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
talking, it's
if
like,
the-
it actually does admit this stuff.
Yeah, and that's important to acknowledge because the consensus view, the argument from the many,
Yeah.
right? How many large groups of people are definitely wrong about at least some things?
Everybody. Everybody.
So the appeal to consensus is not a very powerful argument.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's worth knowing.
Yeah.
Like when there's consensus around something, it's worth knowing. But
This is how people are perceiving.
But there's also value in not going along with that consensus. Copernicus, right? Like the consensus at one time was everything revolved around the Earth.
Yeah.
Obviously, that consensus was so wrong. Like it's laughable at this point. But that's the problem with consensus is it's not always based on data. It's it's built on kind of persuasion often. So yeah, there are problems with that. So.
Well, anyway, thanks for being such a thoughtful and reflective person and being comfortable like learning new things.
Yeah.
That's I think that's too rare of a quality.
Yeah. I listeners might be a little bit lost because they didn't read that conversation. So maybe I'll mention it a little bit.
Yeah.
So like I just started asking ChatGPT these questions of like, I started off with did vaccines end polio? And it actually added nuance right away. It was like it's not as clear cut as that. And then I started just kind of inquiring more and more of like, well, there's never been any studies to actually establish the causation here. So like we're relying on a narrative, even though there are these things that kind of undermine that narrative, like the diagnostic criteria changing and the correlation with other things like pesticides that haven't been looked at. It did mention a couple other correlations, but I don't think they're strong.
Well, maybe I'll just kind of summarize
Yeah.
how my thinking has changed.
Yeah,
Is
that'd be
kind of a reflection. So my takeaway is that yes, the polio vaccine can stop polio.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's this weird little buggy that's being pulled along by the vaccine that actually also causes polio.
Yeah.
And it definitely there's strong correlation between where people get the oral vaccine and later occurrences of this oral derived live virus that's not wild. And so there is nuance to be understood that it's not clear cut. And yes, it is effective, but it is not the only factor. And there are trade-offs that we are well studied, well understood, that should guide policy, but it's sort of a catch-22 where we can stop doing this, but then if it starts to spread, we'll have to start doing it, and then it'll make it spread later, and then it's a dumb situation where you both need and don't need the vaccine.
Yeah.
So my takeaway is there's more nuance than I thought, and a closer look, and I appreciate your curiosity that led me to have better understanding too. So
yeah, I mean, at this point, I think it's almost impossible. I don't like to use the word impossible, but it is highly unlikely that the virus itself is the cause of polio. It seems like there has to be something else because you have all these cases of polio, or tons of people end up with the virus and end up not getting polio. And then right now people are getting, because polio, like the real risk of it was so long ago, a lot of people aren't vaccinated anymore for it. So why aren't we seeing polio outbreaks in all these unvaccinated populations? The only natural cases that we're seeing are in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And like I asked ChatGPT, I'm like, do they use pesticides that are banned everywhere else? And yeah, they do. And I didn't ask which pesticides.
it offered them up. There were
Oh, did it?
There were
Okay,
3 or 4 of
okay.
them, but
Sometimes all that information is like,
I want to add some clarification
Yeah.
to what you said, because yes, the oral vaccine can cause actual spreadable polio.
yeah.
It can. The injectable does not seem to have
Yeah.
that effect. So that's an important distinction
Yeah,
there.
definitely.
And there is wild polio, but its occurrences are very, very rare. Apparently, there were 3 types of wild polio, 2 of which appear to be completely gone.
Yeah.
There is a remaining wild polio. Is very, very uncommon, but it's out there. And the side effects. Well, some people can be harmed by the vaccine. It is not always. I mean, it's like 1 in 2 million people have a really adverse side effect.
Yeah.
And that's
Wait, 1 in how many?
2 million.
That's actually wrong, though. One of the things I found out, because I asked it this question, because it said 1 in 2.7 million. And then I started thinking about that. I'm like, that doesn't make sense, because some of the numbers that it was giving for the number of cases that have happened from the oral vaccine didn't jive with those numbers. So I asked it specifically how many cases of polio, because it gave the number of doses that have been administered. And I think it was 850 million doses administered since 2021.
Okay.
Then it said basically 2,090 cases of polio from the vaccine since 2001. So if you do the math on it,
it's a lot bigger than
it's about 1 in 400,000. So the numbers there are just objectively against what they're saying the risk is. So it is.
Where did the 2.7 number come from?
It's just the official rate that they give, but the numbers don't line up.
Is that the CDC? You mean is the they? Who's the
It'd
they?
be probably World Health Organization, because this is
just kidding. I can never resist that dumb joke, even in my own head.
You know, they do say you sound like an owl.
Yeah.
I've seen some videos where people do that. They say you sound like an owl. Ooh. But yeah, I think all this stuff is really interesting, because there's science and then there's interpretation of science. And in the interpretation, even scientists can get things wrong and interpret data wrong. It happens all the time. But then when you start putting it out there and other people start interpreting it, and then you get politics involved, there's always going to be some other motivation around things. So it tends to be the case that narratives are they're not usually correct. There's some nuance lost, in my opinion.
I can't disagree with you, but for a different reason.
Yeah, what is that?
Okay. I want you to just imagine, I don't know, it's first time you really noticed the Milky Way.
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to go into your mind and relive that moment. I remember I was in a tent camping at Lake Powell.
Yeah.
The middle of the night, I had to pee. I was like 14. I zipped open the tent, and it wasn't light outside, but it was bright, and the sky was absolutely filled with the Milky Way. I'd never seen. I was completely unprepared for what I saw, and it really took me away. But when I go in my mind to that experience that I want to relay to you, I have to put it into words. And my words are a reduction of the internal experience that I'm trying to describe with my guttural vibrations of the air. We're only halfway there. Now, the words, the symbols of the ideas that I picked are now going into your head and painting a picture. But your understanding of any given word may be subtly different, sometimes dramatically different. Maybe you imagined a different kind of tent, or whatever reconstruction you put in your mind is very unlikely to be a direct match of my internal sensation. And really good storytellers can convey that, but it is necessarily a reduction from my perception into my words, and then flung over to you, and then you turn those words into a painting. And it is necessarily person to person, direct, spoken conversation, first person, is a double whammy of reduction in accuracy.
I agree with that. And there's two concepts there that I would. One of them is narrative that I really want to get into because I mentioned it in the last one, but it's a deeper than this, and it's something that is actually I think it's okay. The two things: language and narrative. What do you think? How do I ask this? How how do you see language like as a tool? Like obviously it's a tool, but how do you approach it? Like I guess philosophically.
Language as a tool.
Uh, I guess do we agree that it
So,
is a tool that I would say it's a tool.
without question,
Okay, cool.
absolutely,
Yeah.
it gave our species orders of magnitude of an
Yeah.
advantage over the other primates.
It's the
Orders
greatest
of
tool ever
magnitude.
created. in
No,
my-
it is not.
You don't think so?
No.
What is?
Well, it gets a little weird, but see, after we came up with language, we came up with the ability to write. The spoken word came first, and that was very powerful. But then we got the ability to write. And now our vision, our view of the world is not just whatever's in oral tradition and the memories of the people who are alive now.
Yeah.
But now I can read the thoughts of Socrates and Aristotle.
Yeah.
I can read the words of Abraham Lincoln or Lao Tzu or anybody that's ever written a book. And that gave us orders of magnitude more ability. And it turns out there's a progression that keeps expanding and expanding. But what we run into limitations with all the words in all the books is we still have these guttural sounds that paint the crude picture in our minds from the approximation that came from the rich ideas.
Yeah.
And if we were able to communicate, say, telepathically, and then when I imagine, you can imagine, then I don't need the inefficiency of words. You can simply have the perceptions directly. And there are some intriguing things in nature that suggest stuff like this goes on. The way that bees function in a colony and the ants behave as a single organism.
Yeah.
But there's no ant school. A school for ants, and then they just but the ones that are the guards know to be the guards, and the harvester the harvester, and the queens and the drones, and they all do their thing like one giant comprehending organism, even though the bees are independent physical creatures. There's something else going on that they understand that doesn't rely on words, and maybe it's just pheromones or whatever, but it is not clear to me that blasting the air with vibrations is the most efficient possible way of communicating ideas. So I think language is a wonderful tool, and it was a huge advantage, but I think it holds us back in a large way.
Okay, my statement, it is the greatest tool ever. It's too
like sliced bread. I took it super literally. I'm sorry, I do that perpetually.
It is one of the greatest tools ever created. Like everything around us is basically built by language. Like everything. You can build a house without language, without spoken language. Like not without communication, you couldn't. But with a house, you can demonstrate. Like you can demonstrate how to do things. So you can use pictures and stuff like that to build a house. You can.
Well, now we're talking to like gestures and nonverbal communication, which is not nothing.
Yeah.
But having representative language for words and things and identity, huge efficiency. I mean,
there are shortcomings to language, and then there are strengths of language. And the way I see this, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is as far as what it's for. I do want to hear like what ways of communicating you think are better, or maybe it wasn't communicating, but relaying information.
Well, like our computers are super great at sending information
Yeah.
with extraordinary precision.
Yeah.
But and our imaginations are super insanely rich. Like, who hasn't had a very vivid dream? Like, what hallucinations we are capable of conjuring are insanely rich. But if we could hear each other's thoughts the way bees do, or we imagine like in a sci-fi movie, how much more efficient it would be if we could perceive that way.
Yeah.
It's hypothetical,
Well,
but
it is one of the things that I think humans tend to do is we tend to overvalue what we can do and undervalue what we don't know we can't do.
yes,
And
yes.
we kind of got on this with like the turtles and magnetism. And
mushrooms
stuff
communicate through the mycelial network to
Yeah.
the other trees, and they can move nutrients around. And let's not forget that the mushrooms are of the fungal kingdom.
Yeah.
But the plants are another kingdom entirely.
Yeah.
And the fact that the mushroom knows how to communicate across kingdoms melts my brain. That's one of the craziest details I've ever heard.
You've heard like they react. I mean, plants do too, but they react to music.
There are communication channels that may exist, biological ones on this planet, that are far superior to talking.
This is a side tangent, but because we're talking about mushrooms, the two coolest natural phenomena. It's kind of funny to call this natural phenomena because it has to do with a trip. But I put two things up there. Northern Lights, amazing, like mind blowing. You don't need any drugs to have your mind blown with that. But I took acid one time at a friend's house, and there was mushrooms growing like under
Grow lights.
Yeah, like under UV lights and everything. And we looked at the mushrooms while on acid. And I saw functioning within the mushroom. And to this day, it doesn't completely line up with the way the biology of mushrooms is supposed to work.
As far as we know.
As far as we know. But I'm sorry, no one can convince me what I saw was like a hallucination. And my friends saw the same thing. It was basically inside the mushroom, you saw this network going like this, moving things up to the top of the mushroom, to the cap. And I want to see that again one day so bad. It was incredible. I could have just stared at it the whole night. It was mind-blowing.
I want you to know, I completely believe you.
Yeah.
Here's my explanation as to like why this could be literally possible.
Yeah.
Intelligence is really handy. We dominate the planet not from our muscles, but from our minds. We're smart. It's something that seems to emerge in nature. Crows and octopi and dolphins and whales, parrots, elephants, chimpanzees, like smart animals, very prolific, and intelligence seems to emerge in nature over and over and over again. But every single example I just cited was from the animal kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
There are much older kingdoms on this planet.
Yeah.
And is it more likely or less likely that older kingdoms would have hit on kinds of intelligence that are so alien to us, even though they're on our planet,
Yeah.
that have developed in very sophisticated, non-like conscious person talking kind of ways, like the mushrooms being able to communicate with the trees and move nutrients around, and that is communication. That is understanding the data and taking action to do something about it. That's planning, and it is an awareness of some kind that, but because it doesn't speak English, we're not even listening.
I agree. And obviously there's no way for me to prove any of this. I'm not a mycologist who's, in the lab or anything, but I do believe
mushrooms, peyote, weed, these are plants that have evolved to make us like them so that we'll keep growing them and that sort of thing, right? Not that they evolved necessarily like the mushrooms. They've been on this planet for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
They've been here way longer. And I find it intriguing that their success and their value to forests all over the world, it just screams of some that they help guard and preserve life.
Yeah.
And that's why like hippies worship them and stuff. Like there's something really magical about them that goes beyond like just feeling euphoria.
Yeah.
But maybe if mushrooms can communicate across kingdoms, that's a way of we eat those and then it dials us into a frequency that other life is dialed into. It gets all weird, but
yeah, and it's one of those things that science is an amazing tool, but it has its limitations, and I don't know if science can. I think science probably could, but I think there are certain things like once you go cold objective that it's like, yeah, you might lose a little bit of ability to see what's really going on, So objectively, I think science has limitations. Obviously, like you can't quantify beauty, right? Like there are certain things like we can do studies that show that asymmetrical, we like symmetry and stuff like that. But still, like there are certain things that science just can't get under.
So there's a book on your desk right there. I think it's the one on the bottom. It's the Ken Wilber book.
Oh yeah. I'm loving that book, by the way.
Oh, you've started it.
Oh yeah, I'm not far in. I do a weird thing with books where like the ones that I want to get through faster, I just get through them, and then the ones I really want to take my time, I go through and read like 2 to 4 pages a day.
Oh, okay. And it's a very dense book.
Yeah.
But Ken Wilber, when I started reading this book, A Brief History of Everything, he starts to like kind of poo-poo the Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like fists up, like I'm ready to fight.
Yeah.
And he goes on to explain that while science is excellent at empirically measuring stuff, it is completely blind to meaning. And meaning is the only thing that we're really interested in.
Yeah.
That is everything in our life is about meaning, and science is silent on the matter.
It was just funny because we give meaning to science. We give a lot of meaning to science. So
Yeah.
science is only valuable because of the meaning that we give it, but science can never quantify that meaning.
That's right. And that's why I think you don't like, or why narrative as an idea sticks in your craw. But unfortunately, because of the richness of the world and our imagination, in order to communicate it, narrative is the only choice we have. You can either experience a thing directly or learn it from someone else through narrative. And even experience directly. I'm not hearing the radio waves that are passing through my head, or don't feel the neutrinos. I don't, there are probably pheromones or, I don't know, lots going on. Whatever's going on behind me, I am completely unaware of.
Yeah.
So even our direct experience in the moment is an incomplete little glimpse of what's going on in reality. So that's why we're stuck with narrative. If we didn't have it, we'd be dead in the water.
I want to push back on that, but I want to finish the thought that I started a while ago before I went on all these tangents.
That's why I tried to bring it back to narrative.
Language. I believe language as a tool can be used in two different. It can be placed in two different categories depending on its usage. And this is more like a philosophical concept of like language can create or destroy. It can obscure or it can illuminate. And because of the ambiguity of language, there is the capability of doing both in the same conversation. So we can be very precise with our language and agree on something. And then when we get to a point where our ideas either aren't being understood or maybe we're just not making a good point, we can lean back and say, well, this word and this word, like, it can mean anything. So I'm still right because this word can mean so many different things.
Yeah.
Which I would say is like, for the sake
it's called
of
it's resolving dissonance.
for the sake of intellectual honesty, you have to kind of avoid that as much as possible when you're having conversations. Because if language is only as useful as the mutual understanding that two people have
Yeah.
of the language being used. Like I can say something as articulate as possible, but if you have a completely different understanding of all the words, if we're not sharing those definitions, for the most part, we're going to have differences. But if we're not sharing that, then it doesn't matter because the idea it doesn't land at all, you know?
I don't know why it's such a radical thought to be excited about learning a new thing. Oh,
yeah.
I learned a new thing. That's cool.
Yeah.
I had that wrong. And now I am more equipped to interact with reality because I understand it a little better now.
Yeah.
Every little nook and cranny of like, oh, I learned something. When it's just such a process of discovery, and we hate being wrong.
Yeah.
We hate being wrong. People go red in the face because they can't stand the thought of someone thinking they're wrong, or worse, believing themselves wrong, because that is terrifying. Because if you've been, here's how cults work. If you're in a cult, you do mean things with a self-justified attitude because the cult leader said, whatever, do that thing. Yeah. And then you do that thing believing that the cult leader's blessing makes it right. And if you find out that you've done that mean thing and that guy's a charlatan, then you might be a piece of shit. That guy, then he can't be a charlatan because I'm a good person. Therefore, what I did was okay. And it's this dingy little trap that we tell for ourselves, but our self-image is what gets wrapped around the idea that I don't want to be wrong. I can't be wrong because that means I'm bad. But I'm not bad. I'm good. So it must be right. And it's this little loop we play that we're afraid of the possibility of being wrong. Everybody's wrong, like all the time.
There's not a single person on earth that is right about everything.
And learn better and cooperate better because, my God, how I already feel like I'm learning lots just by having our conversations. You give me things to think about, and I really appreciate that.
Well, I try to approach. I have an ego like everyone else. I have attachment to ideas and stuff like that. Yeah. I will make bold claims like I have without being able to completely back it up. But I do want to be able to refine it. And in the moment, it can be difficult.
Yeah.
But when I think about it, it's like, that is not. I shouldn't have said it like that.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said masks are completely ineffective.
There are a few moments from last time. Yep.
And it's like, I shouldn't have said it that matter of factly because I don't know. I need to be consistent with the level of uncertainty that I've accepted that I have, which is a great level of uncertainty in general.
Right. But back to Socrates, right? The only wisdom is knowing that you know nothing.
And we've both read Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me.
Oh.
And it is an amazing book. And they dive into we don't come to an idea. I'm going to get this wrong. Basically, maybe you can relay this better because the thought isn't coming to me. But it's like we think we come to a logical conclusion about something, but we commit to something and then draw the conclusion. Did I relay that?
Yeah,
correctly?
That's pretty right. She calls it the pyramid, the decision pyramid.
Yeah,
where you can either go left or you go right, and whatever you pick, or forward or back. It's not politically left or right. I mean, you can go one way or the other, and wherever you land, you will convince yourself that was the right way all along.
Yeah. Yeah, we justify after the decision is made. We make the decision, then we justify it with what we call logic. Quite often, it's like, this is the logical decision. It's like, you made that before any logic was thrown in there. So,
and the smarter you are, the more self-deceptive you can be, because you can use those little nuances of meaning of words to see I was still right, and creative minds are the worst for that, because every little nook and cranny just it feels exactly like religious apologetics.
Well, a great example of this is Nazi Germany. The intellectuals led the charge, largely led the charge, and were largely responsible. Obviously, Hitler and the Nazis were responsible, but the intellectuals justified what was going on. So the intellectuals were more than complicit. They were, I guess it is complicity, but they were going
Enablers.
along. Yeah, they enabled it and they helped it get along for that very reason. Like they can justify it. It's one of the problems with being, obviously, like you were just saying,
Probably just lock up the intellectual.
intelligent people, if they're not being honest, they can justify whatever they want by just kind of warping ideas to fit what they want to do.
I want to make sure we're clear about something, because we just lump intellectuals like all into one bucket. But every large organization, every large movement has to have intellectuals.
100%.
Full stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Germany locked up and disappeared many of their intellectuals, their artists, their poets.
Yeah.
The free thinkers and the rabble rousers, like the intellectual exiles. Like there was brain drain. They fled Germany. But you also had, Einstein and Oppenheimer and who's the other one? Werner von Braun. Or no, that he was a German scientist.
Niels Bohr, I think, around that time too.
Yeah. So, the Nazis had many intellectuals.
Yeah. Good.
But
nuance
only the ones that they picked to do their awful bidding.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like thanks for adding that nuance, because it's not a condemnation of intellectuals. It is saying that intellectuals can help further something along if they're ideologically aligned, if they
required,
want to be. Yeah. It's
smart people will help causes they believe in.
Well, and this is not a condemnation of all lawyers, but this is something we can see in society right now. You can have a lawyer who wants to do good and is genuine and is approaching things and wants to be as honest as possible and wants to be good and do good in the world. But you can also have a lawyer who twists the law into making it so horrible things are justified legally for maybe large corporations or something like that. So the law can be twisted. The law is, even though people often think the law is like this black and white thing, it's intentionally ambiguous, which I think a lot of people don't realize, because that ambiguity it's a good thing in some ways, because like if...
Well, may I, on this point, there was another point at which we've gone off the rails with ambiguity. It was before the law. It was actually the idea of good. Because the lawyer that is out there doing good is my definition of good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Agrees with
it
my...
depends. How is he...
And a lawyer that's out there doing their definition of good might look like evil to me. And he's twisting the law. But this guy's going to be twisting the law to my definition of good. Even if it's like I'm trying to follow the law by the letter of the law. And then that's your definition of good.
Yeah. There's The Gulag Archipelago is a really good book. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was a communist and he was bought into the system. And he wrote some disparaging letters about the war, World War II, and Stalin locked him up and went to the gulags. And his work was... He has some amazing insights. And one of them... I can quote another thing, but this one was basically like, nobody really does bad things to do bad things. They usually do bad things because they've justified it and they believe that it's either or the end justifies the means or it's the natural order of things. Those are the two ways that people tend to justify bad things. I'm going to take this because somebody else is going to take it if I don't, right? Like you can justify bad behavior with logic. I mean, you can do this. And then his other quote that I can quote mostly verbatim, and I love this. I'm sorry, everyone. I've said this quote probably 10 times now on the podcast in my 80 episodes, but he says, if only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But alas, the line dividing good and evil strikes through the heart of every human being, and who wants to tear out a piece of his own heart? When I read that, I was like, chills. I was like, that's why I know it. It's just such a powerful quote. It's like, yeah, we're all good and evil. We all have that capability. And anyone, some of the most dangerous people are the people who don't think that they're capable of bad.
So, okay. There's kind of two mindsets, and I hope this doesn't go too off the rails, but there's a cooperative mindset.
Yeah.
And there's a competitive mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the competitive mindset makes a very important distinction between kinds of people.
Yeah.
This and that and neat and fit. The cooperative group sort of is a bring all comers, like,
yeah,
come as you are, be yourself. I don't give a shit. I wear a dress, I put on heels, or wear a banana on your head. I don't care. Then the labels aren't as important because it's the diversity that brings everybody into the tent. But on the divisive side, on the competitive side, there's a knife edge. You are this or you are that. There is no nuance at all in this universe. And the division that insisting on those insisting on those divisions is why we can't find the good and the good side and the bad side, because we're all in the mix together. And I think if we could chill a little on the fact that everybody's different, nobody's the same.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. Everybody's unique. Can we stop beating up on people for being different? And I think the mindset of cooperation will prove to be stronger than the mindset of competition.
I think they're both
they have their role.
I think they're both present in everybody.
Yeah. Yes.
I think there are people who are too cooperative. Well, there are people who are extremely agreeable, and they tend to be taken advantage of. So if you're too cooperative, because there are people who are disagreeable and willing to take advantage of you, you have to be guarded. Otherwise, you're just going to be taken advantage of. So you have to have some balance of it there. I like basketball, and a great example of a competitive person, my favorite basketball player ever, Michael Jordan. I have his card right there. Honestly, I looked up to him, like, because I loved basketball, and I thought he is the greatest player to ever live. Like, I will make that argument for the rest of my life.
And when you were a young lad,
yeah,
you only know what you saw on the court and in the interviews, and you assume the rest of his life he was just as awesome and just as great to everybody all the time, and you loved that image of him, but would later learn.
As an adult, I've spent I don't spend a ton of time, but I love hearing old basketball stories still. I'm a big 90s fan. I love 80s basketball, even though I wasn't, really conscious at the time. But yeah, I like Charles Barkley. I think he's got a really fun personality, and I think it's horribly sad that their relationship is severed because Michael Jordan is so competitive that he can't take criticism. He couldn't. It seems like the reason that they don't have a friendship is because Charles Barkley said that Michael Jordan wasn't doing a good job as owner of the Charlotte Bobcats at the time. And Michael Jordan took offense to that because he needs to be the best at everything.
Yeah.
So to be criticized by a friend seemed to... It
hit Michael Jordan's core wound.
Yeah,
this is an attachment wound.
Yeah, it seems like I obviously I'm not in his head. It seems like he can't be friends with Charles Barkley because if he maintains a friendship with Charles Barkley, he's admitting that there's possible merit to what he's saying.
Yeah, it's very telling when someone can't handle criticism.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean,
because it means there's a self-image, and the criticism, if it's true, destroys that image. So you have to make that go away.
yeah. There's another basketball player, Kobe Bryant. I have his rookie card. I really, I mean, his death is actually one of the few deaths of a celebrity that I was like, so freaking sad. Like I was genuinely a little teary-eyed when he died because I'm like, I was like a teenager and he was a teenager, and I watched him play with my idol and learn from him, and I'm getting a little
oh, I love it.
He became one of the greatest players to ever play the game, and he didn't have Michael Jordan's mentality. He was as competitive, but then he also had this vulnerable side. Maybe not vulnerable, but this empathetic side that Michael Jordan didn't seem to have.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of overlap. But then there was like this, there's these qualities about Kobe Bryant. He's an amazing human being. Like, honestly, we lost a good person when he died. Like, I'm a learner, and you seem to be a learner. Like, I know you're a learner. You don't seem to be. You are a learner. Like, it is my path on this earth. I will die when I stop learning. Like, I know this for sure. Like, my life ends when I can't learn, or if I don't want to learn. Like, I know I will wither away and die. I don't know how long that'll take, but I know that'll happen. And I think that's what Kobe Bryant was. Like, he was a student. Like
really?
He was a student of basketball. Like, he just wanted to learn constantly. The dude knows, like, he knew like 3 languages. There's a story where I think it was Luka Doncic, or maybe it was somebody else, but like, he's Slovenian, and Kobe Bryant learned his language just to talk shit. Like, just to talk shit
that's
in the
funny.
game. Like, and not like to be a jerk, but like, I'm gonna learn your language and like give you shit.
How like did he just learn like a few curse words, or did he like?
I mean, from what I remember of the story, like, he was actually like, he can handle the language. He could navigate it fairly well.
Oh, cool.
Not like fluent.
No, but like passable, like conversation. Maybe?
Yeah. I just find that remarkable.
Well, if nothing else, that's a charming effort to be able to communicate with somebody.
Yeah, and I always like that. If I meet somebody, I'm not fluent in any language other than English. I know a little Russian. I know some Spanish. I can get by in Spanish better than Russian. But I can throw out a few Russian words and be like, "Здравствуйте." Like, I can say hello.
That's literally the only one I know.
Yeah, and "У тебя есть собаки?" And it's like, "Do you have a dog?"
Oh.
And if I meet somebody who communicates differently than me, if their first language is something else, it draws me to try to pick up on that language a little bit, because I'm like, I just think hopefully it's not offensive to people, but I'm like, it's kind of cool to like explore somebody else's, like, I think language is interesting because like you start learning other languages a little and you start realizing this language teaches you to think differently. Like, so somebody that learns this language actually learns to think differently than somebody who speaks English as their primary language. And it's interesting.
Think about the languages that have phonetic sounds, and the Asian languages that have those tonalities that Americans have. Like, all that sounds like a bunch of bull. But think of the nuance that can be expressed in those languages.
Yeah.
For ideas that are not even able to be thought in our heads because there are no words for thinking them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. We've gone all over already.
I assume by now they're sort of on board with this.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully I enjoy this, and I'm a little selfish in how I approach the podcast. There's a reason that I didn't niche down and focus on one thing, because I know I would get bored and I'd stop after 2 months. I'd be like,
I enjoy our conversations, and if we're just doing this for the two of us, I'm fine with it.
Well, I mean, honestly, we would just have just as much
We'd
fun
still
if
do
there
it.
was no microphone,
No,
and
we're
no
lit.
camera.
No,
We
they,
would be having the same conversation. You know, we're trying to make it so people can, people can enjoy
Listen
and
in
listen and everything. But yeah, we'd be having the exact same conversation. In fact,
100%.
we were having the same conversation before we not the same conversation, but a very similar.
Yeah.
Like we were having a conversation that we were like, yeah, we
Yeah,
should
we were talking
record
about
this.
words and
Violence,
and
yeah.
language and violence. Yeah.
Yeah. So narrative.
Brought it right back.
Okay.
Good segue.
You know what higher order thinking is, right?
I mean, thinking about thinking and systems thinking and
Yeah. So metacognition, systems thinking. So it's basically a hierarchy of thought. So you have basic memory and perception.
Ken Wilber's book talks about holons. Did you get to holons yet?
Yeah. Holons, yeah.
This is a holon. So for our listeners, can I explain holons just real quickly?
Please. Yeah.
Ken Wilber came up with notice a pattern among patterns where you can organize things if you follow just a couple of simple principles. You've got a unit of a thing. It can be anything, like an atom is a unit of a thing. And you combine two atoms to make a molecule, and multiple molecules. You take a letter, and that's a thing. You get multiple letters together, and you make a word. But then you can take multiple words and make a sentence.
Yeah.
And you can take multiple sentences and make a paragraph. And multiple paragraphs, chapter, book, so on and so forth. A person is a part of a family. So one person, many persons makes family. Family, neighborhood, town, city, state, nation, planet, universe.
Yeah.
These are incrementally distinct holons. Each layer to exist requires all of the layers beneath it to exist as well.
Yeah.
So if we took away the idea of molecules, everything would be obliterated. There'd only be atoms.
Yeah.
Okay. If we took the idea of paragraphs away, we'd only have sentences. Right. If we took the idea of words away, we might only have letters.
Yeah.
Right. This is a holon, and what you're describing follows this notion of a holon.
I'm not actually convinced completely that it does, although it does in a certain sense. And I've been thinking about this a lot when I'm so outside of our conversations, like I'll be thinking about I dwell on conversations, and it's one of the reasons I love coming back to it, because it's like I have a chance to think about something. I'm not the brightest in the moment all the time, where I'm like, oh, I'm going to say exactly what I should say.
We're unscripted. That's how it works.
But I think about things, and if I'm arguing against something, like let's say I upload our transcript and I'm like arguing against an idea you express, I actually will argue against myself too. I'm like, because I understand that you're not there to make your arguments. So it is implicitly unfair for me to just come from one angle and be like, well, I think I'm right for this reason. I have to look at it. Well, I think Brian makes sense and has a point because of this and this and this. And that's the only way I can do this.
Right. Because the objective is not to prove you are right. It is to become right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a world of difference.
So you have your hierarchy of thinking. You have your basic memory and perception. Then you have your narrative. Then you have critical thinking. And then you have metacognition, which is, am I thinking about this properly? Thinking about thinking. And then you have systems thinking.
Sounds like a holon to me. Take away any middle piece and the ones above it vanish. The ones above are always more complex and fewer of them than the layer below.
See, I think I think you're using memory and perception at every level of that. But I don't think you're using narrative at every level.
You're using cells in your body, but you're also using atoms. It is implied because it's part of a holon.
Yes, but I can show examples how you can engage in systems level thinking, critical thinking, and metacognition without using narratives at all. Like you're actually going beyond narrative. But a caveat to that is that those things exist is actually a narrative. So systems thinking is a narrative because, well, and it all relies on a narrative because it relies on the narrative that we're thinking human beings.
I don't think you can escape narrative. I don't think there's any way around it. Like, damn it if you want, but without it, we're extra screwed.
They're frameworks that you can use. And the framework, narratives are frameworks, and it depends how useful the framework is. And where I differ is narrative when you're thinking about something. Like, so if you're in the overall narrative of humanity, because humanity is a narrative, right? Like the fact that we're all human beings on this planet sharing some level of existence is a certain...
That's a narrative.
It is.
That description is a narrative. Are we a narrative? Yeah, I mean...
It depends.
You have to have a sense of self to comprehend the... Anyway, sorry.
I guess just the concept of we kind of can be a narrative, right? Because it's like, well, who is we? Is we everyone who agrees with us? Is we every human being? Or is we...
Yes, we is.
People in this country, or the state, So I do think that we have to separate narrative from other levels of thinking and understand the value of going beyond narrative. So like,
okay, here's an example of thinking without narrative.
Yeah.
The experience of music. As you listen to music, you feel music, you imagine it can communicate emotion. Yeah. I mean, I think we can agree that music expresses emotion. Yeah. You hear songs and you feel that emotion, whether it's gets you pumped up and going, or you're feeling sense of melancholy, whatever. Music communicates without narrative.
Yeah. So there is overlap in all of this.
Yeah.
There definitely is, because you can say, that's blue, right? And you can say, well, there's narrative involved in that because what is blue?
Like I was taught that that's blue too.
Yeah, there's a narrative around it.
Yeah.
But if we have to differentiate, or we don't have to, but in philosophical conversations, we have to be able to differentiate between when we're on a narrative, when we're engaging in critical thinking, and when we're engaging in metacognition and systems thinking. We don't have to. It is very useful to recognize those differences. And I believe that framework to be very useful. Would you agree that the framework, that hierarchy is fairly useful?
It just hit me like how many meetings I've been in when I used to work a corporate job, where people would have arguments across, and they couldn't agree what the hell they were talking about.
Yeah.
Some were talking on one level, others another, and others another still, with the messiness that is inescapable from language anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, gotcha.
So when we were talking about Russia, Trump and Russia, my perception is that you're a bit entrenched in narrative on that. And obviously you use critical thinking because you saw patterns and you established your narrative based on critical thinking. So, and it makes sense. Like, I think
not a bad way to go.
Yeah. I think when you saw these suspicious patterns, which I do agree they're suspicious, and like I said before, like that is cause to look into something, right? But where I see the problem is not updating it when, like I said, like it's been investigated and people with way more access to information who don't seem to be inclined to help Trump out in this regard. Like when the Republicans did their investigation, I can see like casting doubt on that because of alignment ideologically. But the only two ways I can see the investigation of Mueller and other people who've investigated, the only way I can see this coming away as them like not finding it and it being like malicious reasons is either Trump is so sophisticated and his campaign is so sophisticated that they're just able to do this discreetly without the intelligence agencies picking up on it, or the intelligence agencies are in on it and compromised to Russia too, which both seem very unlikely. I think the evidence
you're missing one for sure.
What?
That Trump is not running that show. That it's that there's definitely a psyops operation from Russia on the United States to keep us extremely divided all the time, so we are completely ineffective as a democracy. Okay, Cambridge Analytica, like they're definitely at war with us.
There are influences all the time.
They don't have the military might we do, and they know it, but that doesn't make them not dangerous.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not saying that Trump can't be influenced by outside.
Yeah, and
I think everyone is. Like
so I read through the chat that you had with ChatGPT that showed the reports over and over that there was no conclusive evidence, and it leaves us with these assumptions if we're going to assume it's still there. And I do feel a softening in my understanding of the degree of the communication that may be going on there.
Yeah.
But I also found it very telling that in each of the sections that came up with did not find anything conclusive. It repeatedly said there is cause for concern, there is a threat to national security, and there was one other thing, but there was alignment on the fact that we should be concerned that there are ties that could have a corrupting influence.
Yeah, that is definitely something that we should be concerned
about. And it suddenly begs the question, like, what exactly are we looking for? What would prove like a dangerous degree of cooperation, and how much cooperation would there have to be? It's
yeah, I think you'd have to. Well, and the reason I'm coming at this is because you spoke matter of factly about it. You said Trump is a Russian agent, or he is compromised by Russia.
Yeah, I'm still suspicious of that.
I can respect being suspicious. It's the certainty with which you say it.
Yeah, and I have to walk that back.
Because I was introducing, like, when I'm looking at that, like, systems thinking to me is, well, in the system of politics, every presidential campaign has contacts with officials from other governments, including Russia. The only reason we know about Trump's is because it was looked into. If we looked into Hillary Clinton's, we would probably find that there are people in her campaign that had ties to Russia.
So, I mean, it's very frustrating that the rich and powerful are so able to connect with each other and do what they want, and we see it around the Utah legislature all the time.
Yeah.
We see it with our congressional representatives. Mike Lee, he drives me nuts. But politicians do for their buddies.
Yeah.
And that is old as government itself. Right? And
it's frustrating. And if you're not ideologically, we have a tendency to notice it more of the people that we're not ideologically
That's right, the outgroup.
But we know it's happening everywhere. We know that insider trading is not limited to Democrats or Republicans, that both are doing it blatantly.
So we're both rightly seeing foul played out on the out group and expecting our in group to do something about it when they're also compromised because they all benefit from the status quo.
Yeah. So with this, it's not like I'm suggesting, hey, I need you to say emphatically that Trump is not a Russian agent.
Yeah.
It actually doesn't matter to me if you maintain those suspicions.
Yeah.
I will maintain those as like that's data. That is data to hold on to. And then if something happens in the future that it's like, there's something that looks more like a smoking gun, it's like, oh, okay. So like things can change.
So like I'm at 95% certain and you're like 45% certain. And as we talk, we kind of realize like, well, we're probably around 60%
I'm
confident.
I'm pretty,
for example.
I don't think he's a Russian agent. I think he might have some influence.
He's in bed with anybody that will give him money.
Yeah, I think he's got influence. And that's another thing is like, I do want to push back on something you said. You said I might be regurgitating Russian propaganda. The word regurgitating means that you're just spewing out something without thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I've thought about it. Like the fact that I haven't looked into the Marshall Plan, but my understanding is that
I did use the word regurgitating. That was kind of harsh.
If we are giving money to countries that we defeated in World War II for 80 years, I think that is bad policy in general. That might align with Russian interests for me to say that, but I'm not regurgitating Russian propaganda. It might be Russian propaganda. There could be Russian propaganda.
Okay, but let's say for the sake of argument, these are factual statements about the Marshall Islands. Where did you get that information?
I haven't researched it in depth or anything like that. It's just I've heard it from a few different places that we basically. My understanding is the Marshall Plan is there so that we can help rebuild the countries. Like it was basically a movement of good faith of like, we defeated you in World War II, but we're not condemning you outright as people. We want to help you get back to a stable state. You just need to agree to certain things and we're going to help you get there.
Well, my question is less about the Marshall Plan itself.
Yeah.
And where you picked up the information or the idea to associate the Marshall Plan with the policies that Trump criticized in 1987.
I didn't know about the 1987
I know that's
criticism
all the more interesting, isn't it? Because isn't that how psyops works? This is how I don't know. I'm not regurgitating nonsense. It becomes extremely difficult to tell, which is exactly what you do with a government, access to social media and lots of money, and confuse the shit out of people.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know exactly. I need to look into the Marshall Plan more. And I don't recall where I heard it. It could have been from somebody who was influenced by the 1987 article, for all I know. So
could be.
But still, it's something that I have thought about. It's not something I'm just regurgitating.
Oh, I see. Right? I see what you're saying. Well,
and I am assuming that they were giving me accurate information, which I do need to look into this more to make sure that what they relate about the Marshall Plan is actually true. Because I'm assuming that, okay, from what they're saying is we've been giving money to the Japan and Germany since World War II. If that's true, I think that's absurd. I don't think we should be I think there needs to be some timeline of like, okay, you can get we're going to help you for 10 years to get your everything on track. But after that, you're, either taper that help off or you're on your own at this point,
Well, I mean, help sort of like, well, we'll put a military base there. So, I mean, there's a little self-serving, right? This is foreign relations, and
I'm talking specifically financial aid, the military bases. Foreign relations self-serving
are complicated.
Yeah, military bases are self-serving, and like you can call that helping another country, but I'm skeptical of any military. That's
right, but we have military bases in Japan, no?
We do, I believe.
Okay,
I'm not
are we there without the permission of the Japanese government?
I'd hope not.
I mean, at this point, anyway. So now we've got an American presence, military targets now from Russia on their homeland. There's got to be some give and take on these kinds of things. it's going to be messy.
Yeah. So why I actually have a problem with the insistence on on focusing on that
Oh,
is because I think there are really valid criticisms of Trump that are very real and apparent. Like, I do think at least his rhetoric can be authoritarian at times. I think a policy thing that I hate of his is how much favor he gives to big business versus small business. Like, I think, I think small businesses are more important than big business.
yes.
But I think the way he approaches policy is bang for your buck. Like I can get
It's always
more bang
transactional.
like I get more bang for my buck helping Oracle than I do some startup that's trying to do the same thing as them.
Well, here's another thing I think is pretty instructive. You heard about the gold card, not the green card, but the gold card?
Yeah.
Touting that is basically saying, I will give deference to people with money. They are to be tolerated, but poor people don't have equal rights. That's what that says to me.
Yeah,
I care about rich people, not poor people.
We are facing a financial crisis in the U.S. Do you agree with that?
You mean like the tariff war and stuff?
No, I mean, Trump, whether he's president or not, we're facing a financial crisis because we're $35 trillion in debt. We're at the point where we constantly have to refinance this debt to make it work because we're bankrupt, essentially. Like when you can't make the payments on interest, that's bankruptcy. Like when you can't even make the interest payments, and that's where we're at. And I would say those gold card is one of his attempts. I think the tariff thing, from what I can tell so far, is he shot himself in the foot with the tariff stuff. I think he had a plan, but I don't think it worked out. I think his plan, and I don't know this for sure, but I think his plan was he was trying to get interest rates to drop so that he could refinance some of the debt that we have. That is, I think we have about $10 trillion or $7 trillion that is due pretty soon. And I think his plan was to drop interest rates so he can refinance that in favorable terms.
I'm curious, where does that idea come from?
I've heard a few analysts like saying this, and it just kind of makes sense that could be the reason. But the tariffs thing is funny because people get mad at Trump for putting retaliatory tariffs, and I do know that the math that they use to calculate these tariffs is kind of screwy and doesn't quite make sense. But I don't see much criticism of the tariffs that have been on us for that long. So like the same people that tend to criticize Trump for the tariffs tend not to criticize, like they say tariffs are stupid, but then they don't say the tariffs that are already on us are stupid. Because this is actually a big problem with globalism, in my opinion. We know we have disparity in living standards between people within countries, right? We know we have the 1%. We know that everyone else doesn't live like them. And we know we have the 0.1%. So we know that equality tends to happen in the system that we have right now.
Did you say inequality?
Did I say equality? Inequality. Yeah. Inequality tends to happen, or it does happen in the system that we have right now. But globalism makes it even worse because within the country, you can exploit people, but there are certain rules around that.
The pyramid can go higher.
But if you can exploit people where there's an even bigger difference, where you can actually use child labor, slave labor, stuff like that, then the ability for that 1% or that 0.1% to extract and exploit is even greater because within the country, there are certain norms, right? Everyone here is supposed to make, I think, $7.25 an hour. That's minimum wage. That doesn't exist in China, India, Indonesia, different places like that. So if you can export your labor there and the conditions are horrible, it just makes that inequality worse and worse. And there's another, I mean, the counter to that is nationalism, like where you're just protecting your borders, doesn't fix the problem that the exploitation still happens within those countries, but it does prevent to a certain degree those people within like our country who are like, we have better standards for labor and stuff like that in general. They can't exploit these other countries as much.
I mean, I think Europe does a way better job of not exploiting workers.
Yeah, I'm saying like Western countries tend to have better standards, but when the people in the Western countries can exploit the labor and the conditions in other countries that don't have those standards, it makes it so the standards for everyone else in those Western countries is lowered because they're now competing with these other countries. So I think a certain amount of tariffs can actually be a good thing because I think certain things make sense to allow for certain things that make sense to work with other countries and outsource to because there's a massive difference in efficiency for or costs and stuff like that. But if you're like right there where it's like you can outsource to China and save 2%, or you can do it here.
Well, I'd rather get my coffee beans from Colombia than Greenland.
Yeah, but if you have a certain bar that other countries have to get past to infiltrate our economy and our resources, and the same thing for them, for us to have a certain bar, and that's about equal, I think that actually creates a good thing or a nice. You can have a balance where you can protect your own country's interests and have global cooperation without letting your country or your people get exploited or the raw end of the stick, essentially.
Well, either way, it seems like we're just kicking the can down the road of what happens when we just have unchecked consumption. Because the more people we have, the more demand there's going to be for more resources, but that is a finite amount, and we're approaching the limit. I don't know if it's 500 years or 100 years or what, 1,000 years, but people then are going to want to eat too, and we feel like we have a responsibility in the future to like figure out how to do things in a way that's a lot less destructive.
I agree. And actually, one of the other things we were going to talk about is money.
Oh yeah.
And I think this is a perfect segue for this.
Oh, cool.
Because, where are
we? 2.
Oh, we're actually doing pretty good today.
Yeah.
We've been going like an hour.
Like I hear at 11.
Yeah, I mean, for the actual recording time. I think one of the greatest evils on earth is central banking and reserve banking and the Federal Reserve. I think is
why
it creates the rat race, because I go and earn, let's say $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
I've earned $1,000. I'm holding $1,000. The Federal Reserve can double the supply and essentially cut the value of what I've already earned in half. And this is what creates the rat race. I believe it causes the low standards of products that we have. Like, I mean, and we've both, I'm assuming, have bought things from China and it's lasted a week and we're like, and that was junk. That was a waste of money. Maybe it wasn't expensive, but there's also the environmental cost of like junk has an environmental cost.
You pick up those lollipops with the blow the bubbles and then whirs the motor, and it's like entertaining for about 5 minutes. Kid eats the lollipop out of the whirring gizmo from the supermarket. Boom. Not only is there now garbage in there, but the machines, the molding, the engineering that went into, and then packaging and shipping and marketing, garbage.
Yeah.
Is just unbelievably reckless of us.
I like my luxuries. I like my gadgets. I like stuff. But I like the stuff that works, that consistently works for years and years. And I believe that central banking, fiat money in general, this money that doesn't have
Untethered.
anything backing it, that can just be printed indefinitely. First of all, it enables war. I think that's one of the main reasons that fiat money exists. I don't know if that was like the intended reason, but it is one of the things it enables. Because imagine if gold was the currency, and there's a limited supply. You can't just make it out of nowhere, and you needed to go to war, and you decide that this war is going to cost, I don't know, I'm 500 pounds of gold or something like that, roughly. Well, you need to actually have that gold to fund the war. So you need to ask your people to give it to you or force them to. You need to coerce them into giving you the gold to fund this war. Fiat money makes it so you don't have to do that. You just print more of it. You steal their money by making it worth less. And then you have all the money you need to go to all the wars you need. It makes it possible.
It enables, yeah.
And it also makes it so people are incentivized to spend their money now because it's guaranteed to be worth less later. This is why I'm such a big advocate of things like Bitcoin. I don't know if Bitcoin is the answer, and Bitcoin does have some problems of its own, but something that you can't just create more of.
It's a public ledger.
Yeah.
It's decentralized.
It has a fixed supply,
and I think
it's really important.
I've wondered since the first criticisms of Bitcoin came out and poo-pooing it, like the most powerful institutions on the planet don't like anything that's decentralized.
Mm-hmm.
So I would expect psyops on that one too.
Yeah.
Whether it's psyops from a government or from a corporation, but poo-pooing the idea of something that's getting popular, because the only difference between a Bitcoin and a dollar is our imagination, and there's no other difference.
Yeah, and I agree.
Now all we need is narrative to complete the transformation.
We give Bitcoin the ability to be worth something because we attach
it's worth something to me.
It's not worth anything inherently. Just like gold is not worth anything.
A dollar is, there's no difference. The only difference between a dollar and monopoly money is we think other people will accept this one.
100%. So, yeah, I think that, like, a lot of people want to blame capitalism for consumption problems. I think it's fiat money. I think it's what we're using to engage in capitalism.
I'm sorry, you've run headlong into the fact that money and capital are the same thing.
They are, but the capital doesn't have to be the money that it is right now. It doesn't have to be something that the government can print more of unchecked.
Is the desire to get more of that, whether it's Bitcoin or dollars? Is the point in that system to generate more of that thing? In a capitalist society, we're trying to generate dollars or yuan or ruples or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever money thing we're using, that's capitalism, is a mindset of consuming in order to grow through consumption.
I think that's a problem of fiat, because since the value of the dollar...
we agree. I think so too.
Since the value of the dollar is constantly decreasing, the only way that you can maintain the value of your company is to constantly have a higher and higher profit. I don't believe that capitalism itself necessitates constant growth like has been the case for the last 100 years. I believe that is because of fiat money, not because of capitalism inherently.
I don't know. I'm not convinced that there's any distinction between whatever fiat currency and capital. Capitalism is to use capital to function. And that's fiat money does that. But
you could do it with gold too.
So any money does that, right? Because Because when gold was the standard, we're bringing in lots of gold. Now Fort Knox full of gold. Now we got a bunch of gold. There is a concept in artificial intelligence called the value loading problem.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get a computer to value a thing? That is a complex problem. Another one is the value problem. What value, once you know how to do it, what values do you put in there?
Yeah.
But there's another area of this space called perverse instantiation. And that's where you tell the AI, I want paper clips. Your job is to make as many paper clips as you can. And that's what it latches onto.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly goes about converting the entire planet to paper clips. That's a perverse instantiation of the AI. You set incredible intelligence on a mindless effort. Calculate the digits of pi. And so it just consumes the world's resources in pursuit of something that is inherently meaningless.
Yeah.
We're doing that in our economy with dollars. We are converting the world's resources to dollars. Mm-hmm. It is our system that modern society is slowly converting the Earth's resources to dollars, which don't have any inherent worth. We are living the dream of a perverse instantiation, and if we don't figure out how to stop it, life on this planet is going to be hell for a while.
I agree with that, but I would say that the dollars are the problem. It's not the fact that we have assigned value to something we call money and use that to exchange value. It's the fact that we've assigned value to something that is constantly diluting. Because if you think about it, think about this with me for a second. Imagine gold was money. We know for sure, like we might find more gold and stuff like that. But in general, gold has a fixed supply. We don't know what that fixed supply is, but we do know that it's a fixed supply. An asteroid can hit the Earth that has a bunch of gold, and maybe we end up with more. That can change things. But there's a fixed supply. So you can't... There's a limit to how much gold something can be worth, right? The max is the amount of gold that exists. There is no limit to how many dollars something can be worth because there's no limit to how many dollars can exist, right? So Apple, I think, is worth $2 trillion or something right now, maybe even 3. I don't know what the number is. I know it was like news 20 years ago when they passed $1 trillion. It took them a long time to get there. It took them less time to get to $2 trillion. If gold, or you can substitute Bitcoin for this, it doesn't matter. But if something with a fixed supply exists as the currency, you have to make everything, if you value everything in that, you have to make it work within the limits of that resource, that limited resource. So Apple is valued in gold. Let's say it's hard because it's hard not to think in dollars because we've been conditioned to think in dollars so much. Imagine Apple is worth, I don't know, 1,000 ounces of gold, which is probably not even accurate. It doesn't matter if it relays well. And they're bringing in 100 ounces of gold a year. That's their profit, right? With fiat money, you have to bring in more every single year. You have to bring in more money. You just have to. And that's why everything ends up being worth more and more money over time because there's more and more of it out there. And we're just consuming more of these dollars and we're creating more of them and all this.
So
can I?
Oh, yeah, please.
Now, if you're valued in gold, you cannot create more gold. And because you cannot create more gold, assuming the population is increasing like it has been, I think the population is expected. Modeling says it should get about to 10 billion and then start dropping. But assuming that the population is growing, there's more people, that one finite resource needs to be stretched out a little bit. There's more demand for it. So the value of gold actually goes up, but the profit, the amount of gold that you need to function, decreases. Your value as a company could stay the same while the amount of gold your company is actually worth, like Apple could be worth 900 ounce, or did I said 1,000 before. Now they're worth 900 ounces of gold, but their value is the same because gold is just worth more then. So we're not incentivized to chase this meaningless number of profit that has to be increasing constantly. And because you have a finite resource, people aren't incentivized to just spend it, spend it, spend it. So I'm not going to buy some cheap product that is going to fall apart. If I'm going to separate from maybe a gram of gold, I need to get my value because I know that gold will be worth more later rather than the dollar I know is going to be worth less later. So $20 right now, it doesn't mean anything. But the gold that I think will be worth, like I have a little bit of Bitcoin. I do not like to spend it because I am very confident that it's going to be worth more later. So I think the incentive structure completely changes if you have a finite resource. And there are problems with having that. Gold is a little bit harder to break up and stuff, and that's something Bitcoin solves. It's also more transportable and stuff like that. But I do think, and maybe like asking you to like, I'm not asking you to like accept this as fact right now, but like consider it because this is something I've thought about for a long time now. And I do believe it to be true. I don't believe it to be a flawless theory, but I do believe it to be a pretty strong theory.
Narrative, metacognition, systems thinking. Am I missing one?
Basic perception is the first one. Basic perception, narrative, critical thinking, metacognition, systems thinking.
What was that order?
And there's multiple involved in that. Like I'm using systems thinking to deconstruct why the incentive structure is the way it is. And then I'm using narrative to create a story.
Right. So let's assume that we've condemned fully fiat currency. How does having just gold change the way we consume?
As I mentioned, because the value is likely to increase, where that it's not the case with fiat money, you are going to be way more careful about when you're using your money.
Right.
So you're going to be.
Well, so what would be the consequences of doing that? So now we have en masse people not spending as much. That would drive down consumption. We could focus more on environmental projects.
Less landfills full of a bunch of junk that people used for 2 weeks and threw away. Like my parents go to casinos and they get junk prizes all the time that are like, tons of people do this. Like there are so many like junk incentives to pull you into different things. And it's like, it's a cheap $5 product. It's garbage. It works for, not that everything.
I know what you're saying, but it tends towards that kind of behavior.
I remember a toaster. It's this garbage toaster. I'm like, I used it once and I'm like, I don't trust this thing. I believe there's plastic being burnt and I would be inhaling plastic fumes if I were to continue using it. It's a cheap Chinese product, probably Chinese. We do associate Chinese products with cheap, not that they always are, but we are, because the money's going to be worthless one day anyway, spend it and draw in more money. So we spend money to draw in more money. And there's this incentive to just spend. And I don't think that incentive is the same.
The consequence of that spending is the speed of our consuming the resources of the planet.
Yeah.
Here's my concern. It doesn't change the paradigm that we're still just consuming the resources of the planet.
I don't think there is any ability to change that as long as we exist. Like we're going to consume resources. My thing is,
I disagree.
Do we want to consume resources recklessly like we are, or do we want to be more diligent and look for quality and not just spending because it's going to be worth less tomorrow?
What you're comparing here are in capitalism using this tool or capitalism using that tool, but it's still capitalism
Yeah.
that depends on consumption. One is consuming at a hockey stick rate, and the other would be a much slower rate. But it's still in the paradigm of consumption. And what it runs into is that it still trashes the planet for the future. And while that seems incomprehensible to us that there's any other way of living for humans, it ignores the fact that for hundreds of thousands of years, Homo sapiens, guys like you and me, brilliant humans, for hundreds of thousands of years, didn't trash this planet.
They still consumed, though. It wasn't on the scale that it is right now.
What did they consume?
Food, water. They, when you make shelter, you're gonna technically consume something. Like
a little.
You're gonna. So yeah, the consumption is.
Did they consume? Did they have reason to kill more than they needed to eat?
No, because they didn't have the ability to store it. They didn't,
Why would they?
But still, you would agree that like we were consuming. Like there's never been a time in human history where there wasn't
animal is a lion a consumer?
Everything is a consumer.
Okay, so
except
is a lion a consumer?
Yeah.
How much does a lion consume?
The food that it eats.
How much?
Just what it needs. Well, I mean, honestly, usually more than it needs, but like other things take care of it, right? Like it doesn't eat every single part of a gazelle, but that gazelle is going to be broken down by fungus. by mushrooms, whatever.
It doesn't kill 5 gazelles and then eat one and leave the other 4 to rot.
Yeah.
So there's a fundamental difference between the way the lion consumes in his sphere and the way we're consuming in our sphere.
I agree, but
and that difference is the word need. How much do we need exactly?
What would the solution be, in your opinion, then?
Well, when the Europeans showed up here in America, they had no sense of land ownership, but they had this tradition living among nature, with nature, understanding when to migrate and where the herds go, and then. So you're familiar with the North American mound builders?
So I mean, are you suggesting that a better system would be to go back to being hunter-gatherers?
What I'm saying is to refer to anything prior to 10,000 years ago as primitive hunter-gatherers, I think, underestimates how capable our species has been for tens of thousands of years, at least, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. And it shows that humans can live on this planet without trashing the place. And it has to do with how much we need to store for tomorrow.
We had a much, population growth, which, this ties together. You're getting into a chicken and egg situation here. Is the population growth driven by the technology, or is the technology driving the population growth, right? Given the current size of the population, going back to what we were doing 10,000 years seems impractical.
Well, no. Let me clarify. What I'm not saying is that we should go back to living that way of life, right? But what they did differently was live with a mindset that was aware of others and the others around them and their relationship to the natural world, from which we have completely cut ourselves off. And so by looking the way we impact each other in the world, and have a positive impact and good intentions as we go about interacting with the world, maybe we can stand a chance of making changes and pursuing different mechanisms for consuming the planet's resources still ultimately consumes the planet's resources. What I think we're going to have to do is start realizing that we're all part of one big global ecosystem and we're all standing in the same tree, and we better stop wrecking the place or we're doomed.
I agree with you. I think the reason I'm talking about gold or a finite resource is because I believe it to be more practical.
It certainly slows the rate of consumption. I think that's probably correct, and that alone would be reason to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we can change the paradigm as far as consumption for sure. Like there is something there. Like I'm not saying you're wrong or anything like that. We're approaching it from two different angles, and mine is like within the system that we're in. If we change this one thing in the system, we get a much less destructive result. Like I accept that there is going to be some destruction. There is going to be some environmental disruption. But just like, like I'm talking about cheap Chinese products, and like you're less incentivized to buy these cheap Chinese products if what you're going to spend to get those is going to be worth more tomorrow. It doesn't make sense to buy something cheap. You want to get quality. You can make that same argument for like houses and stuff like this. Do you need 5 properties? If right now, if you buy a house, it's a safe bet that the value of the house in dollars is going to be higher than those dollars if you just kept on them over the span of 10 years. It could change like in a recession or something like that. In the short term, a house price can fall below what you bought it for. But in the long term, your house price tends to go up, right? So if you have the means in dollars to buy 5 houses, 6 houses that you don't need, that you're never going to go to, it makes sense just for the financial aspect of it, in that house is going to be worth more than the dollars you spent on it, even if you're never going to get the use out of it. But if you're having gold and that equation is no longer the same, the gold is actually worth more than the house in 10 years. Why buy the fifth house? Why buy the 4th house? I'm not against people having more than one house. I'd like to at one point. I'd like to have a house somewhere where I want to be in the winter, and somewhere, or maybe in a different country, or I don't know if I'd need to buy a house. But you're not incentivized as much to just consume recklessly.
Yeah.
And I just think it'd be, without needing a massive structural change, like in a completely different system, you can improve the system that we have.
Attenuate the damage, I think.
Yeah, like
I like the idea.
I mean, isn't it depressing? Like these landfills.
It's horrifying.
And like I've thrown away electronics where I'm like, this is depressing. Like there's metal in here. Like there's work that went into this. There's environmental destruction. And it's just garbage. There's nothing I can do with it.
Okay, so can I tell you why I have a beef with capitalism?
Yeah.
Why I think it's fatally and fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
Number one, resources are finite. End of story. Like that's the end of the argument right there. But the other thing that drives me nuts about it is that in order for it to work, it has to solve problems and then continue to create the problem to fund itself. So here's an example. women's pantyhose used to run all the time because they were fragile and they weren't good at making them yet. Somewhere around the 60s, they got better at making materials that didn't run as well. And say they made pantyhose that don't run, shipped them out all over the world, and pantyhose sales tanked because they weren't running all the time. So they said, shit, go make them run more. So people have to buy them again. So we solved the problem. The might and brilliance of capitalism solved the problem of pantyhose that don't run. And once we got to the solution, we went, I need the money more. And this is what happens. This is why big medicine wants you on things that you have to buy over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Staying on medicines and things that wear out, and what do we call that? Planned obsolescence all over the place. And in medical supplies, they love to have you buying a piece of this and a gizmo for that. I had anyway, medical devices are really rotten. Like, they're designed to wear out and have to be replaced. And, there is wear and tear on these things, but once we solve a problem, it doesn't make money anymore. So we have to create a problem. Even though we've fixed the problem, we can't move on because we're chained to the teat of money that it generates.
It's funny because we're both in agreement on there's a problem in consumption, but we're seeing different sources of the problem. And even after what you just said, I still believe the problem is the money, not the capitalism. And here's why. That same story you just said, the pantyhose one.
Yeah.
Why does the company need you to spend more money? Why do they need to keep bringing in more money? Because the money that they already brought in is going to be worth less tomorrow.
Ah, I see.
So I believe that not that it would eliminate it entirely, people are still going to want to earn.
But you're saying what I'm pointing to is an effect of the currency, not the pursuit of capital.
Yeah, because if you can earn, let's say, a gram of gold for pantyhose, right? If you can earn that, and that what you earned is going to be worth more later, you don't need to keep making more and more of it. The reason you need more and more consumption, and we don't want pantyhose that lasts a long time, is because the money that we get for it now is not worth the same in a year. It's not worth the same in 5 years. So you do need to have more and more coming in. That's the problem with fiat money, in my opinion.
So with the other problem, do you risk having someone just hoard and hoard and hoard their money that becomes worth more and more and more while producing less and less and less? Doesn't that grind everything to a halt?
I don't think it grinds everything to a halt, but it is, I don't know if it's a problem. It actually gets closer to what you want.
So what do you say to people who say, well, you're going to ruin the economy? I know what I'd say.
We're in a certain paradigm of what the economy is, and we need to get we're only ruining the economy as we understand it right now. We're not ruining economy, we're ruining this one.
Yeah.
So if we move to a finite resource as the money base, I hate that we have to look at that. But yeah, if we move to a finite resource, the economy is going to be drastically different. And that change makes people extremely uncomfortable. But I don't know, destruction of the world makes me uncomfortable, and it clearly makes you uncomfortable,
right?
too.
Like think of the economy as an artificially intelligent creature that's consuming the resources of the planet.
Yeah.
We want to slow down what that's doing, and we want to stop the people who are making decisions for how our resources are allocated to get on board with the fact that, hey, there are other people and other species here too that have claim to existence on this planet.
Yeah. There's some problems with a finite resource as money too.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ignore that. I'm still trying to work through.
Because I played the other side of the coin by saying, well, what about the economy?
Like wages are an interesting thing. Because like if I'm a business owner and my business is going to be worth less gold later, then I can't commit to paying you a certain amount of gold now and for the foreseeable future. Like I would have to fire you and then hire somebody else at a lower but equal, like a lower number that's relatively the same now because of the change in value. So there are problems with a finite resource in certain regards, but I do think that overconsumption is one of the big things. And then I mean like war, overconsumption, those are two massive things.
It's so self-absorbed.
Overconsumption? Yeah.
Just and even war at the top is overconsumption by people who make the gun.
It's insane, right? Like, it is insane to me.
And who's going to stop them? They make the guns.
Yeah, it's insane that people advocate for war and death because it
that requires the othering that I was talking about.
Benefits them financially. Like,
this is the border. Those are the wrong people. Look at how wrong they are. Yeah. No, you can't blur the lines. No, there's no other genders. I mean, I don't think we should be so focused on what makes us different. We just start to look at what makes us the same because there's way more there.
Do you think what I'm saying has merit though?
Yeah.
Okay. I think what you're saying has merit too. I think people tend to get too focused on these concepts of capitalism because like you have to have a ism usually means a belief system, right? So like it's actually one of the, listening to debt, it's actually one of the intellectually dishonest things I think David Graeber did. He talks about this baseline communism and I cringe when I hear it because he could have used many different words, but he chose to use a word that is an ideology. And
is there a better word that you would have used?
Reciprocity.
Yes. Okay, so he's speaking in terms of a communal mindset.
Communal, yeah. Like saying something is communal is not the same.
But when he says communism, right? Because there's baggage with that, even though he's using it correct. And in a certain context that doesn't mean Russia.
Communism is an ideology, which is of course it's a belief system, right? Which implies like it's basically a moral statement. He's attaching morality to it.
There's the idea of behaving in a communally mindset sort of way and a government that is communist.
Yeah, so when he uses the word communism, my problem with it is it attaches a sense of morality to it. And
isn't there?
Well, we know morality isn't fixed.
Well, you said reciprocity, right?
Yeah.
That's a kind of morality
maybe not even reciprocity because there's no reciprocity there's no reciprocity between a mother and a child. There is just giving, right?
No.
Well,
no,
I mean, I guess
because the mother receives a great deal of joy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's reciprocity there, but still, like, I don't think communism is a good word to use. I think it's just a very loaded word.
I agree.
And it implies a baseline morality, essentially.
Reciprocity does.
I don't believe there is a baseline morality. And I think that's objectively true because we can go to different cultures in the past, and even now, we can look at different cultures and see that the morals are not the same, and you can say part of that could be taught, but I don't know.
Well, let me challenge that a little bit. and it's in influence up there.
Yeah.
But it's this appeal to reciprocity. And the thing about reciprocity is this weird little sense that we get when someone does us a service or we do someone a service where there's a, oh, that person helped me. I would like to help them. Or I helped them. I hope they help me when I have the need. Right?
Yeah.
This is the sense of reciprocity, but it is not confined to our species. Chimpanzees understand this. Dogs understand this. Cats understand this. You have more than one cat in your house, try feeding one a bigger piece of meat. You've got several dogs, give several of them like little bitty treats and give one a cookie, or whatever. They will be aware that something is unfair.
Yeah.
Reciprocity is baked into mammals at a minimum, including the whales and the dolphins. Crows understand this. The corvids, right? Octopi and cuttlefish seem to have some comprehension of this notion. So there's something about.
Are you saying fairness or reciprocity?
Reciprocity, the sense of to give and to receive. There's a back and forth to care, or to recognize that the other has done right by me. I'll do right by them. It's literally just the golden rule. It seems to be baked into the way nature's wired in certain contexts anyway.
Yeah, the dog example confused that a little bit because that's fairness is different than reciprocity, right? Like if you're just saying you got more than me, that's fairness, not reciprocity.
But that's an awareness of differences.
Yeah.
How come that, why that sense of fairness, I think at the very bottom of it is a sense of reciprocity. Is or at least they're kissing cousins conceptually.
Because I'm not convinced that that reciprocity is just this inherent thing and not somewhat of a product of the system. Like we're taught, no, you share. Like all of us are taught, and most of us.
Well,
we're taught
who taught the dolphins? Who taught the orcas?
Because I'm not sure the reciprocity in dolphins.
So they do right by their own. They can blow bubble rings.
Yeah.
Did you know that if you put a dolphin that knows how to blow bubble rings into a tank with dolphins that don't know how to blow bubble rings, before long they'll all know how to blow bubble rings, and they seem to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And they'll find a puffer fish that they're not harmed by the venom. It gives them they get high.
Yeah.
And so they'll pass around a puffer fish. Like they're highly social creatures. Social creatures understand reciprocity. Full stop. Who taught the dolphins? Who taught the whales? Who taught the wolves?
I wouldn't call that reciprocity.
But my conclusion that because they're social creatures, they must understand reciprocity. How else could you have a social order without any sense of reciprocity? These are sophisticated animals. They're not just mindless buffoons swimming around in the ocean. They are thinking, interacting creatures.
But I would need an example of that reciprocity because I'm not something's not coming to mind.
Okay, here's one. Orcas coordinate their hunts to kill to capture prey, and they make sure that everybody gets to eat. One doesn't just eat the walrus alone and then go home. They're cooperatively hunting. They're cooperatively sharing the kill.
I'm not convinced that's reciprocity. That's cooperation.
But to make sure that everybody gets some dinner?
And fairness. That is fairness.
Which I think
reciprocity would be more they do something for one and then it's reciprocated later. Like, so I'm going to give up my chance to eat today.
I think you're kind of splitting hairs if you're saying that, okay, well, they're cooperating and sharing the kill, but where's the reciprocity? it's the action of we competed for this, and then we all get to eat, and it's keeping things at a zero balance with everybody.
I disagree because it's just cooperation, because if they cooperated to hunt and then one orca was like, I'm just going to eat everything, there'd be no reason for those other orcas to ever help that orca hunt. Just shun that one and then go and cooperate with each other who are going to share the meal. So that would be more cooperation and fairness to me, not reciprocity.
That sounded like a description of reciprocity to me, because now this one done me dirty. I'm out, because they're keeping that is an offense of reciprocity. That's what, when you give, you got 3 dogs and you give one a yummy bone and one a yummy bone and another one a piece of lettuce. The third one will be like, huh? And the other 2 will be like, oops, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah, but fairness and reciprocity they have overlap, but they're not the same.
So I say they're kissing cousins.
Yeah, but you don't.
Like, well, what's the? I don't know. I guess I don't think of it as that different. Is the distinction that important?
I think so, because for reciprocity, I think you have to give something and then get something of equal or comparable
so
value later.
Possibly for next time, I'll bring some examples of.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't
reciprocity among animals.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just, based on what I've heard so far, I'm not convinced that's reciprocity. So I want to look into this. I'll look into it too, because I'm curious about this.
Cool.
There were 2 other things I disagreed with Graeber on 2 other things.
Oh, so we were talking about where do we learn reciprocity? Is that where we started?
This
was a tangent.
Yeah. So my problem with this is I don't think it's an objectively true thing that we have like a baseline morality. Like, there's a difference between how people act and the underlying reason why they act a certain way. So my problem with, and you've already said you have a problem with him calling it communism too. So I'm not like arguing with you. I'm just explaining my analysis of this. When he used the word communism, he's attaching a belief system to the underlying behavior. And you really can't do that retroactively for people you can't study and can't talk with and understand their underlying motivations.
Yeah, you can make guesses at it.
Yeah, but you can't know for sure. So to attach an underlying like ideological reason of why they're doing that is a stretch for him to do that.
Okay.
So, and people might be confused why we're talking about this. So it's because I asked you about investing. I asked you, like, do you do any investing? Because you're a pattern guy. You pay attention to patterns and you notice and you can foresee patterns really well. And I'm like, that'd be very useful, because I'm like, I do some charting and stuff like that, and I would put that to use. And you said basically suffering isn't entailed in all of it, which I don't.
Oh,
I don't want to like butcher what you were saying. So feel free to elaborate and.
Oh,
clarify.
yeah. So, I thought you might stumble across this in the book debt. So maybe we'll get into that another time when we don't have to bring everybody up to speed on a big old book. But we were talking about the lion not killing 2 gazelles, just the one.
Yeah.
Right. Not taking more than he needs. But if he takes 2 gazelles for tomorrow, all he's done is kill a second gazelle, and one that's just gonna like rot, right? But the taking of the extra becomes a way of getting more and more and more for the self. Can we? I want to pause this topic till a little for another day.
Okay.
And I'll get into why in a little bit, but
Yeah.
I want to hold that thought for another discussion,
Yeah, sounds good.
if that's all right.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a big case to build, and
Yeah, maybe I can give you my thoughts on what
Please do.
but the problems I had
I'd
with
like
his
to hear
book,
that, yes.
because you can take that into account as you're figuring out how you want to relay this. So,
Thank you.
gold, or let me address markets first. He said markets aren't real, and markets are mathematical models. I just disagree with that completely. I think it's objectively false.
What do you mean markets aren't real? Or what do you think he meant by saying that?
He's saying that they're concepts, which I agree with. They are concepts. They're abstraction.
Sure. So is a church or a university
yeah.
or a country.
But then he says they're mathematical models, and that's just wrong. They're based on math, but they're not. Like, when you model something, you are taking something from the real world, and you're applying math to it so you can,
Yeah,
put it in a chart or
an
something.
equation is not a supermarket.
Yeah, markets are real in the sense that, like, they really exist. Like, they might be concepts, but they really do function.
It's a meme. It's mimetics. It's
Like, tons of things.
It's something that only exists in the minds. I can't touch a market. I can't.
You can interact with it, though.
Yeah. Like, where do I go to touch a university? Exactly. Is it the ground? Is it
but
building?
there's a lot of things that are real that are concepts.
Sure.
Right? Like, and then
Right. I mean, I'm saying that's the difference. It really exists in the mind. Yes.
Yeah.
It's non-physical, is what he's saying.
Yeah. So, I just think he's kind of wrong. I think he's.
I mean, money,
short-sighted.
in the same sense, money's not real. I mean, yes, it is, but no, it isn't.
Yeah, it's not. So yeah, I think he's a little flawed there. I think he calls it a mathematical model, which it's not. There's nothing being modeled. It's just playing out and looks like a model.
Okay.
But then the bigger one was the gold as an IOU, and I think that's objectively false, because his example of why gold and an IOU are the same thing is because an IOU can be used kind of like money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if I owe you $10, and you can do this with a check. I was telling Holly this. People don't do this often anymore.
But you could.
You can forward it now. What's it called?
Yeah. You forward the check to the next person, right?
It's not called forwarding.
Yeah,
though.
there's a special.
It doesn't matter.
I think I kept a book of checks just for nostalgia, but I haven't.
Yeah, you can write pay to, like, you. I can write you a check.
Oh yeah.
And then on the back of it, you can write pay to the order of Holly, and you can basically give it to her, and then she could cash the check that I wrote for you.
Yeah.
IOUs, same thing. You can do that, and you can pass it around and use it kind of like whatever it's valued at.
It's like a coupon for $10 that the bank will really recognize, so you can hand it to your friends. The coupon's as good as $10.
Yeah, so just because, so he basically says that because gold can act the same way, I can give you gold, and then you can give that gold to somebody else, and it kind of acts the same way. I believe that's the argument that he's making for why.
Yeah, the container for value.
Yeah. The problem is, just because you can substitute something for another in one context doesn't mean they're equal. Doesn't mean they're the exact same thing. You can use something in a context like, I can use a book, or I can use this thing right here, this candle. I can use this as a paperweight.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that's what it is.
Right.
Although I know you can get into philosophical discussions.
You could use it as a hammer, but it'd be a lousy hammer.
Yeah. So you can substitute something for something. But it doesn't mean they're the exact same thing, because it doesn't mean that they work in other contexts. So the difference between gold and even money and IOUs is it actually finalizes the transaction. So if I give you an ounce of gold it's done. You can give that to more people, but our business is done.
Yeah.
Versus an IOU, when you give that to somebody else, the value only exists because it assumes that I'm going to come back eventually and repay. And then he also, I think, makes the argument that it involves trust, if I'm not mistaken. And it doesn't. Gold does not. There's no trust involved in money or gold. Money, you can make the argument that there's trust in the government, but even then,
you don't. Right. I guess is he saying you don't need? There's the element of trust is not necessary for gold because that's the whole burrito.
Yeah, and honestly, there is no trust. Like if I give you gold,
it's not necessary.
I'm not telling you that it's going to be worth the same amount.
I guess the trust is that like it's pure gold.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like there's always like, am I getting what I'm being told I'm getting?
Maybe that's what he means.
But assuming like you can verify that and stuff, there's no trust involved in that transaction outside of just, is this what you say it is? There's trust in that sense.
Yeah, you're right. It's inescapable now, isn't it?
Yeah, but yeah, I'd say there's no trust. There's just risk. So if I give you gold, you're taking on the risk of that gold being worth less later or more. There's risk. There's nothing like once I give you this, you can't come back to me later and be like, oh, this gold isn't worth as much now. I want to renege on this.
I'm not sure by calling it risk, you've absolved yourself from anything, from trust. Trust and risk. Are they two sides of the same coin in a transaction like that?
I don't think so, because IOU depends on trust because you're...
No, gold.
I know, I'm saying an IOU depends on trust because you have to trust that I'm going to come back and fulfill some obligation to this exchange later.
Or it'll loop around.
With gold, that doesn't exist.
Right.
It's just a finalized transaction.
Okay.
There's a risk that you're taking on when you accept the gold, that the gold could be worth less later. Same with money. Like when you accept money, the transaction is final, but there is a certain amount of risk involved. Like the government can print double the money supply. Yeah. It could be worth less tomorrow. So I don't think there's any trust involved. And I don't think gold is, I just don't think it's an IOU at all. Just because it can operate in that very limited case where he related, it doesn't, it falls apart upon deeper analysis. And every writer, like most writers are going to do this where they present an idea and there's some flaw because they've probably entrenched themselves in the thought and idea for so long that there's some often simple thing that they're overlooking over time. They've bought in, scientists do this all the time, right? They believe their theory to be right, that they spend so long on it and then realize sometimes 20, 30 years down the road that it's like, oh, this was flawed and it was just, I didn't see it, but they spent, it's like sunken cost fallacy, right?
This was, it was in Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. There was it was the first, it was an early doctor to realize that there was apparently some sort of germ transfer from patient to patient. And this, it was, the doctor was delivering baby.
Yeah.
And all the women were dying, passing around, because they didn't know to wash their hands and going from room to room to room to room. And the women were all getting infected and then dying because the doctor's hands were dirty. And started washing his hands in an iodine solution, and the death rate plummeted. It went from being really bad to really good. Fewer women were dying. And he goes around to the medical community and said, there's germs on your hands. Wash your hands and you'll have a better death rate. You'll have an improvement. And
what are you, crazy? Invisible things that cause sickness?
Just, yeah. They told him that he was full of it, and they discredited him, and they said it was nonsense because they couldn't stand the thought that they were directly responsible for the patients they were killing, because they believed that they're good people, and they couldn't stand the thought of having killed lots of people because they didn't know to wash their hands.
It's so interesting how
That's what it feels like to be wrong.
How
Is
hard it is to evolve a thought in the moment sometimes. Like, that's the problem. They couldn't accept, even though accepting it would fix the problem going forward. They didn't want to accept it because it condemns their past.
their ego, the story about the narrative about who they are and what they've done.
So interesting. And especially when you look back in retrospect, like, duh, washing your hands is going to be better.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, what quirky thing came around that I've blown off as hogwash, and one thing I really should. There's so much out there.
It's been so much fun,
dude. We do this, and I walk away just thinking for hours and hours about stuff we talked about.
Yeah, I get obsessed with it. I go back and I'm like, I sincerely love having my ideas challenged. Like,
same,
because
in a thoughtful way too.
Yeah, and it's why I asked you. It's not like I told Holly, I'm like, I can ask somebody I'm ideologically different than to join the podcast and just use them as a punching bag or some just make
or to rehash the same.
They're not capable. Like, but I know you are capable of pushing back and enlightening me where I'm missing things, and hopefully I can do the same. And it's so much fun because it's like, this is where we learn. Yeah. This is learning. And I learn every time I talk with you.
Same.
I love it.
All right, buddy. Well, thanks so much. Looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, let's we can dive back into money. I want to talk about fractals, astronomy, because every time we talk astronomy, like I'm just like, I'm interested in astronomy, but like it was in my early 20s where I'm like, I took an astronomy class and I'm like, I loved thinking about it. But every time I hear you talk about it, I'm like, I learned something. I'm like, my mind's blown. So
I'll talk. Astronomy is my favorite of all the things I know about. One of the top things that occupies the space in my brain is the room full of astronomy. I love that stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, man.
All right.
Okay.